The damp chill of Wuhan's late autumn morning seeped through the ill-fitting window frame, settling deep in Wei Guoqiang's bones. He woke, as he always did, not with a gentle stirring, but with a cough, a rough, rattling sound that tore through the thin quiet of his small apartment. It was a landlord's cough, demanding rent from lungs that had paid dearly for 40 years of cheap cigarettes and the smoky haze of his old Lanzhou Lamian Guan. He was 72, and felt every minute of it etched onto his insides. He swung his legs stiffly over the side of the bed, the linoleum cold beneath his bare feet. Each movement was deliberate, measured against the familiar ache in his knees and hips. His reflection in the dusty wardrobe mirror showed a man diminished. Once robust, the proprietor who greeted customers with a booming laugh and a flourish of hand-pulled noodles, he was now stooped, his shoulders slumped as if carrying an invisible weight. A tremor danced intermittently in his hands, a nervous flutter he tried to hide by clenching his fists. His clothes, a faded blue Mao-style jacket over a thin cotton shirt, were clean but worn. Relics from a time when they represented sturdy practicality, not just all he could afford. He shuffled to the tiny kitchen alcove, filling an electric kettle with water that gurgled reluctantly from the tap. Breakfast was plain congee, cooked the night before, reheated until it was a warm, tasteless paste. Easier on the stomach, easier on the wallet. As he ate, standing by the counter, he glanced at his phone, a cheap model, screen smudged, battery icon already dipping into the yellow. He squinted, tapping clumsily at the banking app. The number that appeared swam before his eyes for a moment before resolving into a figure that tightened his chest. Barely enough for another month's rent, let alone utilities or food. A familiar knot of anxiety twisted in his gut, sharp and bitter like bile. He carried his empty bowl to the sink and looked out the window. His apartment was on the 5th floor of an old residential block, a typical Laoqiuku, wedged awkwardly between gleaming new high-rises that pierced the hazy sky. The relentless sounds of construction, drilling, hammering, the rumble of trucks, formed the city's perpetual soundtrack, a constant reminder of a world rushing forward, leaving him behind in this crumbling corner. He remembered when this neighborhood was full of familiar faces, the scent of coal smoke in winter, the clatter of mahjong tiles from open doorways. Now, many old neighbors were gone, replaced by transient renters or silence. His gaze snagged on an old, slightly tarnished noodle ladle hanging from a hook on the wall, the only souvenir he'd kept from the shop. 40 years he'd stood behind that counter, kneading dough, pulling noodles, ladling out steaming bowls of broth. He'd been someone then. Wei Laoban, respected. He'd enjoyed the banter, the steady stream of customers, the clinking glasses of Baiju after closing, the click-clack of mahjong tiles with his buddies late into the night. He hadn't worried about saving. The shop was his security, his pension. Or so he'd thought. Then his health started its slow, insidious decline. The breathing problems, the joint pain that made standing all day impossible. He'd sold the shop 7 years ago too quickly for less than it was worth, needing cash for a sudden health scare that turned out to be just the opening salvo in this long war against his own body. A sharp ping from his phone jolted him from the memory. A notification. He fumbled with the device, his fingers thick and unresponsive on the small screen. It was the gas bill. Higher than last month. Much higher. He stared at the amount, then back at the meager balance in his banking app. The numbers simply didn't add up. A wave of dizziness washed over him, cold sweat prickling his brow. And then the cough seized him again. Harder this time. A brutal hacking spasm that bent him double, stealing his breath, leaving him gasping, clutching the edge of the counter. The world narrowed to a tight, painful point. The burning in his lungs, the fear that clawed at his throat. Not enough air. Not enough money. The twin realizations slammed into him with the force of a physical blow. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of his breathlessness, followed swiftly by the familiar corrosive burn of shame. He, Wei Guoqiang, who had always provided, was now adrift, unable even to keep the lights on, unable even to draw a full breath. The coughing fit subsided, leaving him weak and trembling, leaning heavily against the counter. The silence in the apartment felt immense, amplifying the frantic thumping of his heart. He needed to do something. Pay the bill. But how? The online payment system was a labyrinth of tiny characters and QR codes he couldn't decipher. Last time he'd had to ask a young neighbour for help, enduring the polite impatience that felt like pity. His pride recoiled at the thought of asking again. He spent the next few days in a state of low-grade panic, masked by his usual grumpy exterior. He ate even less, just instant noodles now, ignoring the salty film they left on his tongue and the doctor's warnings about sodium. He kept the lights off until dusk, layering on worn sweaters against the chill, rather than turning on the small electric heater. He tried the payment app again, squinting, stabbing at the screen with a frustrated finger, only to be met with error messages or prompts he didn't understand. It felt like trying to read hieroglyphics. The digital world, the ubiquitous realm of WeChat Pay and Alipay that everyone else navigated with effortless flicks of their thumbs, remained stubbornly opaque to him. Another wall separating him from the flow of modern life. The cough, however, refused to be ignored. It became his constant companion, a rough punctuation mark to his days and nights. Finally, the tightness in his chest grew too persistent, the wheezing too loud in the quiet apartment. He knew he couldn't put it off any longer. Bundling himself in his old jacket, he shuffled out into the bustling street, heading towards the community health clinic a few blocks away. The clinic was chaos. Fluorescent lights glared down on rows of plastic chairs filled with coughing children, anxious parents, and other elderly people clutching numbered tickets. The air hung thick with the smell of disinfectant and sickness. After an interminable wait, his number was called. The doctor, a young woman with tired eyes, listened distractedly to his chest through her stethoscope, her expression impassive. "Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease," she stated flatly, tapping keywords into her computer. "Likely from the smoking. Your joints are showing significant arthritis too." She rattled off advice. Stop smoking immediately. He'd tried and failed countless times. Avoid dust and fumes. Eat better. Do gentle exercises. Then she printed out a prescription for 2 inhalers and some anti-inflammatory pills. These should help with the breathing and pain. Take them exactly as prescribed. At the adjacent pharmacy window, the cost of the medications made his breath catch again, this time not from illness but from shock. It was nearly half of what little money he had left. He paid, his hand trembling as he counted out the worn banknotes, the pharmacist's indifferent gaze making him feel small and exposed. He walked home slowly, the small plastic bag with the medicine boxes feeling impossibly heavy in his hand. The doctor's words echoed in his ears, a life sentence of managed decline, fueled by pills he couldn't afford. Desperation gnawed at his pride. That evening, after hours of internal debate, he finally did it. He dialed his son's number. Wei Jian worked a demanding tech job down in Shenzhen, a world away. The call connected after several rings. "Dad?" Jian's voice sounded tinny, distant. "Busy." "Ah, Jian." Wei Guoqiang began, trying to keep his voice casual. "Just calling to see how you are." "Fine, Dad. Busy. You know how it is? Everything okay with you?" The practiced inquiry. Wei Guoqiang hesitated. Tell him? Tell him about the bill, the clinic, the fear?" The words caught in his throat, choked by decades of ingrained stoicism, the deep-seated reluctance to be a burden, the mianzi that demanded he maintain a facade of capability. "Everything's fine," he lied, the word tasting like ash. "Just money is a little tight this month. The gas bill was high." A sigh on the other end of the line, faint but unmistakable. Frustration. "Okay, Dad, how much do you need?" Jian asked, his tone shifting to brisk efficiency. Wei Guoqiang mumbled an amount, less than he truly needed, but more than he felt comfortable asking for. "All right, I'll transfer it later today. But Dad, you really need to watch your spending, and you know smoking hasn't helped your health." The familiar lecture softened slightly by distance, but still sharp. Wei Guoqiang felt a hot flush of shame creep up his neck. Yes, I know," he muttered, wanting only to end the conversation. "Thank you, Jian. Work hard." He hung up quickly, the silence rushing back in, heavier than before. The money would come, a temporary patch on a leaking dam. But the call had cost him more than the amount transferred. It had chipped away another piece of his dwindling self-respect. Seeking escape from the 4 walls of his apartment, he started spending more time in the nearby park. It was a small patch of green amidst the concrete, equipped with basic exercise machines perpetually occupied by determinedly cheerful seniors, and benches where others gathered to chat or play cards. He usually sat alone, watching, listening to the fragments of conversation, the laughter, the rhythmic click of Shang-Chi pieces. One afternoon, a woman sat down on the other end of his bench. He recognized her vaguely, Mrs. Liu, from a few buildings over. She was around his age, perhaps a bit younger, a widow known for her pragmatic energy and for somehow mastering the baffling world of smartphones. She ran a WeChat group for seniors in the Le Choc, organizing occasional potlucks or group walks. "Old Wei," she greeted him, her voice brisk but not unkind. "Haven't seen you out much lately. Everything all right?" She noticed the way he held his phone, squinting at it. "Still struggling with that thing?" Wei Guochang stiffened. "It's fine," he mumbled, pocketing the phone. Mrs. Liu wasn't easily deterred. "You know, there's a volunteer group that comes to the community centre on Tuesdays. Young students, they help us old folks with phones, apps, paying bills online. Very patient." She paused, observing his guarded expression. "Or I could show you sometime. It's not so hard once you get the hang of it. Easier than letting those utility companies charge late fees." Her offer was practical, sensible. But his pride, that stubborn, irrational shield, flared up. Accept help with something so basic? From a woman? It felt like another admission of failure. "Thank you, Mrs. Liu, but I can manage," he said stiffly, standing up abruptly. "I need to be going." He walked away, ignoring the shrewd, knowing look in her eyes. He could almost hear her thinking, "Stubborn old fool." The money from Jian arrived, a notification pinging on his phone. It covered the gas bill and the first round of medications, but offered no breathing room. Relief was quickly replaced by the gnawing anxiety of the next expense. What if the coughing got worse? What if he needed to see a specialist? What if the landlord raised the rent? The what-ifs circled like vultures. He needed a refill for one of the inhalers sooner than expected. The cost loomed large. He found himself walking towards the street where his noodle shop used to be. He hadn't been back in years. He rounded the corner and stopped. Where the familiar faded red sign of the Weiji Lamian Guan once hung, there was now a trendy bubble tea shop, all bright lights and pastel colours, loud pop music spilling onto the pavement. Young people clustered outside, laughing, tapping on their phones. It was like looking at an alien landscape. His past had been completely erased, paved over by a future he didn't belong to. A wave of profound irrelevance washed over him, colder and more isolating than the Wuhan wind. He turned away, the ghost of broth and garlic replaced by the cloyingly sweet scent of artificial fruit flavours, the ache in his chest a hollow echo of the 40 years he'd poured into that vanished space. He clutched the cheap plastic inhaler in his pocket. It felt flimsy, inadequate, a fragile shield against the overwhelming tide of consequence. The breaking point came not with a dramatic collapse, but with a mundane betrayal by his own body. He was reaching for the kettle on a high shelf in his kitchen alcove, a shelf he'd reached for thousands of times before. A sudden wave of dizziness, perhaps from the medication, perhaps from sheer exhaustion, swept over him. The room tilted violently. His hands scrabbled for purchase on the smooth cupboard door, found none. His worn cotton slippers slid on the linoleum. He went down hard. Not a clean fall, but a clumsy crumpling, his bad knee buckling, his shoulder slamming against the edge of the small table before he hit the floor. Pain exploded in his shoulder, sharp and sickening. For a moment he lay stunned, the dusty floor cool against his cheek, the ceiling light swimming above him. Then came the fear, icy and absolute. He was alone, hurt, unable to get up. He tried to push himself up with his good arm, but a fresh wave of dizziness and the searing pain in his shoulder sent him slumping back down. Panic tightened its grip. His phone. It had skittered across the floor in the fall, landing near the doorway, screen dark. It seemed miles away. He lay there, breathing raggedly, listening to the sounds filtering up from the street, car horns, distant chatter, the unending construction rumble, sounds of a world utterly indifferent to his plight. His mind raced, a chaotic jumble of shame, fear and regret. Call Jian? The thought brought a fresh wave of humiliation. To admit this, fallen, helpless, needing his son to rescue him like a child. The shame was a physical thing, pressing down on him almost as heavily as the pain. He thought of Mrs. Liu. Practical, no-nonsense Mrs. Liu. Would she help? Probably. But the thought of her seeing him like this, sprawled on his dusty floor, was unbearable. His Mianzi, his precious, tattered pride, screamed against it. He could just lie here. Wait. Maybe the dizziness would pass. Maybe he could crawl to the door later. But the pain in his shoulder was intensifying, radiating down his arm, and the cold from the floor was seeping into him, a chilling premonition of a far worse fate if he did nothing. Time stretched, measured in the throbbing of his shoulder and the frantic beat of his heart. The apartment felt suffocatingly small, a trap of his own making. Decades of small neglects, minor indulgences, failures to plan, they had all led to this moment, lying helpless on a cold floor, facing a choice that felt like the sum of all his life's evasions: pride or survival, isolation or the bitter taste of dependency. He squeezed his eyes shut, the image of his younger self, vibrant and laughing outside the noodle shop, flashing behind his eyelids, a ghost mocking his present state. Then the image of Jian's stressed face during their last call. The burden he was, the burden he had tried so hard not to be, yet had become through his own stubbornness. With a groan that was part pain, part surrender, he began the agonizing process of dragging himself across the floor towards the phone. Each movement sent jolts of fire through his shoulder. Dust bunnies clung to his worn trousers. Finally, his fingers closed around the cool plastic. The screen remained dark. Dead battery? No, wait. He pressed the side button. It flickered to life. Low battery warning flashing insistently. His thumb trembled as he navigated the smudged screen. Whose number? Jian's contact photo, a slightly forced smile from a family gathering years ago, stared back at him. Admitting the full extent of it, the fall, the pain, the underlying desperation, the need, felt like stripping himself bare. Or Mrs. Liu? He didn't even know if he had her number saved. He could shout, bang on the floor. Someone might hear eventually. But the thought of neighbors gathering, seeing him like this? No, it had to be Jian, his son. His responsibility, however strained their relationship. Swallowing the thick knot of pride in his throat, a knot tighter than any cough, he pressed the call icon beside Jian's name. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Each ring echoed the frantic pounding in his chest. Please pick up. Please, Dad. Jian's voice, wary, slightly impatient. It was midday, he'd be at work. Wei Guoqiang opened his mouth, but only a dry croak emerged. He cleared his throat, the effort sending another twinge through his shoulder. Jian, he managed, his voice thin, unfamiliar even to himself. Jian, I fell. Silence. Then, Jian's voice sharp with sudden alarm. Fell? Are you okay? What happened? I don't know. Dizzy. My shoulder. It hurts badly. I can't get up. The admission came out in a rush, the dam of his pride finally broken. Tears pricked his eyes, tears of pain, relief, and utter humiliation. Okay, Dad. Okay. Stay calm. Don't move. Where are you? In the apartment. Jian's voice was taking charge now, the initial annoyance replaced by focused concern. I need to arrange something. Can you unlock the door? I don't know if I can reach it. Okay, let me think. Is there a neighbor, Mrs. Liu? Wei Guoqiang hesitated for only a second. Yes, Building 3, apartment 402. All right, I'll call her right now. Ask her to check on you, maybe help with the door, and I'll get the first train I can. Just stay put, Dad, I'm coming. The call ended. Wei Guoqiang let the phone slip from his grasp. He lay back against the cool floor, utterly spent. He had done it. He had asked for help. The shame was still there, a dull ache beneath the sharper pain in his shoulder, but it was mixed with something else now, a fragile sliver of relief. He wasn't entirely alone. It wasn't long before he heard urgent knocking, then Mrs. Liu's voice calling his name through the thin door. He managed to shout back, guiding her to the spare key he kept hidden under a loose tile by the entrance, a contingency he'd never imagined actually using. The door opened, and Mrs. Liu bustled in, her usual briskness softened by genuine concern as she took in the scene. Without fuss, she helped him into a sitting position, assessed his shoulder with practiced hands, looked dislocated old Wei, and efficiently called for an ambulance, her calm competence a stark contrast to his own earlier panic. Jian arrived late that night, haggard from the long train journey, his face etched with worry and exhaustion. The hospital had confirmed a dislocated shoulder and kept Wei Guoqiang overnight for observation. Seeing his son standing awkwardly by his hospital bed, Wei Guoqiang felt a complex mix of gratitude and residual shame. Dad, Jian began, then stopped, seemingly unsure what to say. Jian, Wei Guoqing said quietly, looking directly at his son. Thank you, and I'm sorry, for being careless. Jian sighed, pulling up a plastic stool. Let's not worry about that now, just focus on getting better. But the awkwardness between them had lessened slightly, replaced by a shared understanding of the crisis averted. Jian stayed for 2 days, helping his father settle back into the apartment, ensuring he had enough food and his medication refilled, even patiently showing him, step by step, how to use the basic functions of the utility payment app on his phone. It wasn't a magical reconciliation. The underlying tensions and years of unspoken frustrations didn't vanish, but a small bridge of honesty had been built across the chasm of pride. After Jian left, life didn't suddenly become easy. Wei Guochang was still 72, his lungs were still damaged, his pension non-existent, his savings precarious. His shoulder healed slowly, leaving a persistent ache. But something had shifted within him. The fall had stripped away the last vestiges of his denial. He couldn't pretend anymore. A few days later, Mrs. Liu knocked on his door, carrying a small bowl of steaming chicken soup. "Just thought you might need something nourishing, old Wei," she said matter-of-factly. He invited her in, thanking her properly this time, without the defensive edge. She didn't pry or offer